and welcome to the latest and final IPM webinar of the year. Now, I think someone must have leaked your Christmas list because what more could you possibly want this December than Promotions Wrapped? A chance to hit pause on 2026 planning, step out of that content treadmill for an hour, and rewind what actually happened this year across food and drink, experiential, and the legal landscape. In 2025, marketing was told to look up. Literally, on the 1st of July 2025, an 11-foot Superman appeared on top of the Shard for DC's Look Up campaign, setting a record for the highest public sculpture display in the UK. But 2025 also told us to look out. Merriam-Webster recently crowned slop the official word of the year, which, as you know, is shorthand for low-quality AI-generated content churned out at scale. Let's be honest, this was not the industry award any of us marketers asked for, but it did capture a year of brain rot deepfakes, uncanny Christmas images, and of course the renaissance of the M dash. Meanwhile, this Black Friday, TikTok Shop said it had its biggest UK sales date to date, with major retailers like M&S and Aldi leaning in. But the same tech story had a darker chapter too. Cyber attacks stole the front pages this year. In May, M&S reported a cyber incident, Co-op then confirmed a cyber incident, and Harrods was drawn into the same wider moment of ransomware, data theft, and operational disruption. Tech has been both the hero and the villain of 2025. In terms of more data points, during Easter, Cantor had promotion spend at 29.7%, nearly £3 in every £10 spent on groceries being on promotion. And it didn't fade. By November, promotional spending rises to 31.2% as value stays front of mind. Now, the IPA bellwether tells the same story of selective budgets going into channels that are trackable, targetable, and tangible. Sales promotions up 9.4% and direct marketing up 9.1% in Q2. But from speaking with our membership across the UK, the headlines isn't discounts are back, it's meaning is added. The fight for the basket isn't just about money off, it's about value added. But be careful how much value you decide to add. Ryanair recently stopped new signups to its Prime loyalty scheme just 8 months after launch, as members redeemed more in benefits than the fees covered. In Q3, the IPA then had budgets swing hard into live attention. In Q3, with events rising to 10.91% up. Without stealing her thunder, Nancy Cullen will unpack what that experiential uplift actually looks like across the UK, where it's growing, which categories are leaning in, and what campaigns shifted the needle this year. And the main course for legal was obviously the turning point where HFSS regulation stopped being on the menu and properly arrived at the table. But more of this to come later in the session with Sam Winterbourne. So these are three trends that the IPM has noticed this year, starting with object storytelling, when the object becomes the media. In a year of slop, the brands that landed often did it without something you could hold, frame, wear, or keep. Artifacts that slot into your customers' lives. Guinness played this brilliantly. Pint of You turned a beer mat into a literal lens on life. A small, simple prop that engineered user-generated content. And the little umbrella was just as smart, or the Guinea umbrella, I should say. A miniature umbrella designed to protect your pint during those rainy days we were all too familiar with. That same desire for analog, real, tactile objects in a digital world showed up in entertainment too. Netflix's The Thursday Murder Club leaned it hard into knitted postbox toppers and even a knitted billboard, because when everything looks instantly generated, made by hand reads as trust, effort, and character. And the object as media thread ran through other campaigns we've been monitoring at the IPM as well. Gymshark's laundrette pop-up at High Rocks even started with a simple insight that finisher patches end up forgotten in drawers. So they built a retro laundrette where athletes collected a Gymshark coin, fed it into the pop-up machine to unlock merch that their race badge, to unlock merch, and also their race badge could be custom stitched onto their hoodie. Of course, this trend crystallizes with Greggs taking its iconic sausage roll to Madame Tussauds, making that point loud and clear. Moving on, storytelling, the arms race for human narratives. Storytelling is also one of the big headlines for 2025. underneath all the stunts and stats, the most telling signal this year was structural. Companies are openly hiring for storytelling as a skill set. The Wall Street Journal reported this month that LinkedIn job postings mentioning storyteller doubled year on year to reportedly tens of thousands across marketing and comms listings. And crucially, these stories aren't told with copy alone. They're built as scenes, props, and participation where the audience is treated not as a customer, but as a main character. Boots Beauty House Party didn't just demo products, it staged a cultural moment that Gen Z could step inside, pivoting the brand back into relevancy. And partnerships kept the plot twists coming. Babybel and Stranger Things taking over Wickham Caves for a retro screening. Pringles and Super Mario turning the pack into play with limited edition tubes and mystery flavor guessing. Lastly, we're seeing the lines between disciplines continue to blur. The next trend we've been tracking at the IPM is how the lines between disciplines is blurring. Out of home behaving like experiential, experiential engineered for social, and IRL and URL stitched into one integrated journey. We can look at Uber Eats as King's Cross Do Nothing for 60 Seconds campaign, a Halloween stunt which showcases how a live experience doesn't end on the street but can be built in app through rewards redeemed on the platform. Lucasade's Ice Kick Vault is another, an ice block installation with a code lock safe dropped in Shoreditch, teased via online clues, including from Jude Bellingham, pulling people from social into a physical Easter egg hunt to unlock prizes and first access to the product. Then for the purest proof of out of home you can touch, Australia nailed it. Selly's liquid nails literally glued a kayak, an arcade machine, and even a mounted marlin fish to an outdoor billboard and told people if you can take it, it's yours. It created some great scenes of builders pulling, tugging, attacking, but nothing budged. The failed heist became the content. So now that we've put some shape to 2025, it's time to introduce our esteemed speakers. First up, Danny Horsley is a senior brand strategist at Elephants Can't Jump. And if anyone's tracked how shopper behavior has actually shifted this year, it's her. Hi, Danny. Good morning. How are you?
Hi, Harry. I'm great. Thank you so much for inviting me to speak here. I'm really looking forward to it.
Good stuff. Great to have you on board. Next, we pivot from supermarkets to experiential. Nancy Cullen from Space and People has one of the best viewpoints in the industry on what's happening in live activity right now, what's growing, where it's showing up, and which formats are proving their value in the real world. Nancy, welcome. It's great to have you with us. How are you today?
Thank you. Yeah, great to be here. And yeah, very well. Thank you.
Good stuff. And last but not least, finally, we're ending where every campaign eventually ends up. Are we allowed to do this? Samuel Winterbourne, the IPM's Regulatory Affairs Manager, spends his days on the front line of regulation and he'll unpack the legal landscape. Sam, welcome back to your second webinar. How are you today?
Very well, thank you, Harry, and thank you very much for having me on. It's always a pleasure to run through all things compliance with our members here today.
Good stuff. I feel like we've steamrolled through that opening. This is meant to be a chance to pause, sit back and reflect, but we have an hour and we have a lot of trends to unpack. I'm going to now pass over to Danny when her slides are ready and look forward to it. Thank you.
Great, thank you. I'm just going to share screen and then I will go to full screen. Can everyone see this?
Yeah, can see it.
Okay, brilliant. Well, yeah, thank you again so much to the IPM for hosting and for inviting me along to speak. I will be speaking about five trends here, all around how the food and drink industry has changed this year. I take quite a sort of zoom out approach. So I look at how retailers are acting, how consumers are behaving, and a few predictions for the future as well. I come from Elephants Can't Jump. We're a food and drink only brand agency. We do brand strategy, consultancy, but also consumer research, mainly in the form of qualitative, so focus groups, ethnographics, but we also touch on quantitative too. Um, so let's get into it. So I think the first thing to say is that, it's good news. I've been working in the food industry for about 5 to 6 years now, and it's good news. We're seeing that the food industry is adapting for the better. Of two things, of the planet and of consumers. And we've seen that about sorry, 70% of consumers are now actively looking for more sort of health conscious, sustainable food choices, which is a big shift from only a few years ago. So good news is that we are slowly seeing transformation in terms of the food industry for the better. So let's get into the trends. So 5 trends. So the first trend is that functional foods take stage, or they continue to take stage. Protein continues to fill the shelves, and fiber will continue to enter and grow. The functional foods market is projected to grow by 8% annually year on year from now on, which is great. It's great to see that we're starting to see things that are actually functionally helping our bodies in terms of well-being and wellness. And we're seeing protein continue to power on. So we're seeing this through many different aisles of the supermarket, within lattes, through to convenient breakfast foods, to even to protein pasta. And this isn't only in the UK, we're seeing this over the globe, especially in Europe. This Teddy bar is a bar that we found over in France, dialing up protein again as well. It was really interesting. I was working with M&S earlier this year, and we were looking at convenience meals, sort of pre-prepared meals. And I think it was about April this year, they had to double their range of protein ready meals because of the interest, because of the demand ultimately for their protein range. It's not only now within M&S, just within ready meals, we're seeing this protein range in all different sort of aisles, even in breakfast bars and crisps and convenience and stuff like that. So protein continues to power on. And we're also seeing fibre, which is becoming much more front of mind. And we're wondering whether in the future it will become similar as to how protein has grown. So we're seeing this, of course, in cereals, but also in drinks now. So launched this year, Fibre Up, which is a drinks brand. So making it much more on the go, and in a whole different format through a drink where you can gain your fibre. What we're seeing in France and other parts of Europe is that high fiber kind of claims on pack have increased by 30% in the last year alone, which is just amazing to see that brands are becoming much more sort of aware, and we're also seeing brands like Bold Bean that are kind of on a mission almost for ensuring that people are getting more fiber into their diet. So this is something which is great. We're really seeing, as we're on cereal, kind of hot off the press yesterday, was California, as a state, has sued all of the big beasts, and one of them being Kellogg's, because of their highly ultra processed ingredients and processes. I need to track it. I don't know anything more than that because it's so hot off the press, but just a kind of really interesting piece there. And again, moving towards a better sort of future for food and drink and for consumers. Trend 2. So local, organic and seasonal produce, of course, is on the rise. There's a real interest for more local and organic. So about 60% of UK consumers are now saying that they prefer to buy local and buy more seasonal, which is a jump of about 15% from many years ago. Only a few years ago. And we're seeing a real resurgence of sort of independent greengrocers as well, which is brilliant to see. In terms of being hot off the press again, is a couple of months ago. I think this was only last month that this came into news. Is that British strawberries are now available all year round. So, whilst we had many years during the festive period where we'd have imported strawberries from the likes of Spain and Egypt and Morocco, we're now able to eat our berries much more locally. Which is just brilliant. The Summer Berry Company have made this happen over in the Midlands. They've invested in some really sort of high-tech, advanced technology, LED lights, and they're researching not only to make sure that they can grow, but also that they can produce strawberries that actually taste great, taste good, taste how they're meant to taste. It's really interesting. I've been working a lot in fruit and fresh produce and doing a lot of consumer research. And when we speak to consumers, we keep getting the same sort of feedback or the same theme around fruit, which is, they say things like it doesn't taste as it should or it doesn't taste like it used to. So there's something there, there's something around, linking that back to people wanting to eat more fresh, more locally, more seasonally. So they're getting that taste, not only to help the planet, but also their taste buds, I suppose. Trend three is that the definition of indulgence is changing. And I think we can't really sort of say this without talking about weight loss drugs and how they're a part of this and they're a part of the kind of the indulgence movement and the dial changing and will continue to be in the future. So in the UK, we have about 2.5 million people on weight loss drugs. That could be Ozempic, any form of weight loss drug. And 1 million out of those 2.5 million in the past 6 months have started taking them, which just shows how it's becoming, the uptake is increasing quite dramatically. We've now found that there's, whilst people are taking jabs, next year there'll be a pill form. So those people who are afraid of jabs no longer need to be afraid of this. They can take a pill form. And we're also seeing in terms of the market that there's a prediction that 5% of sort of sugary indulgent foods will drop, the market will drop. We've seen much earlier this year actually that Weight Watchers US went bankrupt. I assume a lot of that is because of weight loss drugs. It's really interesting sort of what's happening, and we're seeing that it's going to keep going. It's going to keep increasing in terms of the impact that it's making on our industry and on brands, on the UK, on consumer habits. And another little stat is that by 2029, it is predicted that the market will be worth £100 billion, which is mega. And linking this back to indulgent food, there's a lot of research from the people that are currently on the drugs that indulgent foods, there's less of a craving for these indulgent foods as well. Still being researched, but just an interesting point there. And what this means, not only for people who are, taking weight loss drugs, but people who are becoming much more conscious, is that they are having much smaller portion sizes and smaller snacking is on the rise. And we can see this. This is a brand, Moi, we were actually working on at the beginning of last year. And they do sort of French donuts, but they're mini, so they're mini beignets. And it's all around sort of making people have that slice of sort of indulgence, but on much more controlled portion sort of size. So that's trend three. Trend four is that end benefit and usage communications are being used much more. And we've seen this for quite a few years in the food industry. So, innocent drinks or Robinsons with their energy drinks or immunity drinks. We had it with tuna even, energy tuna. And we're also seeing it with the likes of olive oil. I think the olive oil industry has been interesting because people struggle to know the difference between, classic olive oil or extra virgin olive oil. And what Graza have done here, which is the number one olive oil brand in the US at the moment, they've done extremely well over the past couple of years, is provide some really sort of interesting language around how you could use it. So they have a sizzle, extra virgin olive oil, a drizzle, and then a fizzle, which is for frying. So sizzle is for sizzling, and frizzle is for frying, and drizzling is just for putting dressing, for putting on top. So it's that sort of language where brands are becoming a lot more sort of interesting in terms of how they're communicating on pack. Back to the UK, we're also seeing how, Waitrose is brilliant for this, how they're doing sort of recipe cards, at shelf banners, at shelf leaflets that help people really understand how to use their produce, their sauces. So, for example, Napolina here talk about all the different types of chopped tomatoes. Again, a really interesting category where people just don't know the difference between different types of chop and how to use them. So Napolina here have just enabled consumers to understand in a really simple manner so that they can take it back home and know exactly what they're doing with it. And we're seeing that a lot in the food industry, is just so much more helpful communication. The last trend here is around the fact that new and innovative brands are on the rise. And this could become, and we're starting to see it becoming an issue for more traditional brands. For example, we've got the brilliant brand All Things Butter here. And of course, I'm sure the brands such as Lurpak or Kerrygold are starting to, they're being sort of nipped at their heels here. We've got Tony's Chocolonely, which is a brilliant brand. They're absolutely delicious. They have innovative flavors, and they, of course, also talk about sort of the quality and looking after their workers. So again, they've got the traditional brands such as Cadbury's and Nestle that are probably starting to worry as well. And Trip. This is an interesting one because Trip have kind of entered the market with a whole sort of new ingredient, CBD, that can help you relax and calm. And I suppose it's more about they've taken a bit of an occasion state that other drinks, such as the Coca-Colas of the world, would otherwise be taking. So it's interesting. We're seeing how sort of much more young and interesting, sort of a bold challenger brands are coming into the market. We are Elephants Can't Jump. I think I'm just about good for time. So we are the agency for food and drink. We drive commercial success, loads of different brands, examples of clients that we've worked with and are still working with, and all the different things that we do for them on here. Thank you so much for listening. We'd absolutely love to help you if you need any help understanding your consumer much more on a deeper level. If you need any help with brand strategy, innovation, pipeline creation, add us on LinkedIn, Elephants Can't Jump, or add me, Danny Horsley, or Bob Bayman. And visit our website. And I have a little sort of Instagram foodie account where I kind of snapshot some interesting things that I'm learning within the food industry. Follow me on there if you just want a sort of little quick snapshot, and you're on Instagram a lot. But thank you so much, and thank you to Harry and Emma for inviting me to speak.
Thank you, Danny. That was brilliant. I can vouch for your LinkedIn trend reports as well. I've a keen follower of that, and it's a
Oh,
great weekly recap you do of the food and drink trends in the industry. Functional foods to grow 8% annually. Great to see things helping our body, but also important to make sure as marketers we can back those claims.
yeah.
Whilst Nancy gets her slides ready, if you do have any questions for our panelists, for Danny, please do pop them in the Q&A chat and we'll get back to them at the end. We would love to hear your views. Nancy, when you're ready, I can see your slides. I'll pass over to you.
Okay, thank you very much to the IPM for inviting me to speak. I'm going to talk, it's a bit different to Danny's presentation. I'm going to talk about the trends we've seen in experiential space in 2025. For people who don't know me, I'm the CEO of Space and People. We're the UK's #1 agency for space bookings. Our aim is to connect brands with the right spaces in the right places. And at the moment, we're booking about £10 million worth of just space per annum. In this presentation, I'm hoping to look at 2025 and then look at what that could mean for face-to-face experiential marketing in 2026. And this is based on our data, so Space and People data, the £10 million that we've booked this year, and our insights database, which I would point out is available exclusively on the IPM website. So you need to be a member of the IPM in order to access our insights database core. So looking at 2025, these are the stats that we booked. And in terms of our business, it's reporting an upswing in total activity, which does correlate with Harry's view on the Bellwether, the IPA Bellwether report, which suggested that investment in events and experiential remains a resilient priority for brands, and that they're reallocating spend towards experiences that directly engage audiences. This is against the backdrop of overall marketing budget declines. I think experiential space gained plus 3.4% in Q3 2025. And like I say, if you looked at my business year on year, that would very much reinforce that view. I was asked to look at trends. And so the number one trend that we've seen is that sampling is leading the way, being the single largest behaviour in 2025. Space and People booked sampling activity for a host of products this year. We managed campaigns for household products, for pet food, to high-end beauty brands and wellness products, again relating back to Danny's view that there's a big upswing in interest in wellness. Why is sampling leading the way? Agencies tell us it reduces risk for potential buyers, it drives conversion, and it builds brand awareness very quickly. It also fits with a younger generation trend who are keen to explore and discover. The numbers being distributed by our agencies are impressive. For example, people sampling at a major UK railway station could be giving out up to 40,000 samples a day. So sampling is a huge element of the work that we do. With second in the run-up place is experiential activations, and I'll talk a bit more about those. That's 38%. The rest of the activity is split across customer acquisition, pop-up retail, and live stunts, but very much a big upswing in terms of sampling. The second big trend that we have noticed is in beauty, and there are all sorts of reasons for that, but very much the sort of fragmentation of beauty retailing seems to be one of the reasons behind it. You no longer have to go to a department store to buy beauty. Boots has upgraded their game, and there are a plethora of Space and Keys, Sephora on the high street. So there are a multitude, H Beauty is another one, a multitude of places where you can buy beauty products. In fact, the beauty industry has gone to being a brutally competitive market. And our experience reinforces that, in that beauty brands, high-end beauty brands, are using experiential as a main point in their marketing spend. So we booked brands such as Estee Lauder, Charlotte Tilbury, and Dior. All took lots of space in shopping centres in 2025, alongside more mainstream brands such as Maybelline, L'Oreal, and Soap and Glory. Again, why is this? The brands state that the organic content and social amplification added to the ability to drive footfall in store and sell products from their stand is their reason for activating. And we had one major brand reporting 20,000 samples distributed, 2,000 gifts with purchase redeemed, and 6,000 engaged visitors. It's hard to argue that experiential for beauty does really work. Combined with that, the ability to show tech, the sort of AI skin analyzers, it makes beauty a great experiential activation. As I said, we doubled the number of beauty bookings in H2. So beauty, it really is becoming a big trend in terms of experiential. Trend number 3. So we did see a lot of interest from nicotine and vaping products earlier in the year, but actually it's the food and soft drinks brands that continue to dominate in 2025, representing 30% of the bookings, and activities ranging from classic brand to hand to many more immersive experiences, often tied to summer, sport, and on the go. We saw lots of traditional brands such as Pepsi, Greggs, Costa, Magnum, Kettle Crisps. And then again, I go back to Danny's trend in wellness. We have got a fast growing wellness sector, Muller, Protein, Humantra, Naked Bars, among the many wellness brands that we managed activations for. It appears that the emotional connection of experiential, away from the noise of the supermarket shelves, and obviously in economically squeezed times, trial minimising risk for consumers, means that FMCG will continue to invest in this form of advertising in the short to medium term. Fourth trend, tech. Streaming and tech have gone big on presence this year, and here is a lovely picture of the Stranger Things Netflix Christmas tree at London Waterloo. This is probably a new trend for us. Increasingly, we are seeing tech brands use live environments to make digital first services. feel bringing the tangible, the intangible, tangible. So we booked activations in 2025 for Samsung, Netflix, Audible, Virgin, Spotify, Adobe, Google, and Disney Plus, all with creative builds, all there to maximize visibility, to get dwell time for social amplification reasons, and also to differentiate directly and sign people up. If you're looking at Spotify and Audible, for example, to sign people up to their services. So they're not just using it for visual impact or to explain complexity, they're also using it as a sign up point. And one of the biggest brands that we work with this year is Samsung, a huge campaign with 84 bookings, 57 venues in 27 cities and 297 live activations. As you can see, a huge rollout for them, bringing their new devices and AI features to life, immersive sets, demos, staff level interactions across a multitude of different venues, travel hubs, shopping centres, university campuses. Giving consumers a hands-on experience seems to be the route moving forward for tech brands. Next trend, not much of a trend actually, more of a London remains the core destination for experiential. And if you're wondering why, agencies state the notion of a global platform is why they choose London. Audience density and a huge number of locations where people linger. I'm talking about places like outside major railway stations. I'm talking about the South Bank, Covent Garden, etc. There are a huge number of places to activate in central London. And brands also feel that London, activating in London, is a sign of confidence and of intent. That doesn't stop Manchester being the very clear second city for activity. And this interested me because we've just seen Manchester creep past Birmingham for the first time, chosen by agencies apparently because it's popular, it's strong student numbers, less of a trend bubble location than London, and it is becoming clear that brands like Manchester as a trial because it will show them whether their activation will work across the UK if it works in Manchester, which I thought was a really interesting comment from a number of agencies. And then the follow-up is Birmingham, Leeds and Liverpool, as you would expect, major cities in the UK give brands a national coverage for multi-city tours. But London obviously remaining the biggest. Venue insights, so splitting that out. So we've looked at the cities, but then we need to look at the type of venues. And what we saw in 2025 was a bit of an increase for shopping venues. And we think that is mainly to do with the fact that we're seeing this big growth in beauty brands promoting. They very much choose shopping venues because then they can get people to go straight into the nearest store if they're giving them discounts, etc. So shopping centres and travel hubs evenly split at the top of this. City centres popular for brand theatre, particularly popular over the summer, and for the very large footprint builds, you can't beat a big city centre location. A new one on us this year is now that universities are a consistent part of the puzzle for agencies. We've talked about wellness, we've talked about tech, we've talked about entertainment. Obviously, if you're targeting Gen Z, you get a good lifetime value. But also the students' ability to socialise their activations is obviously really, really important for a brand. And students are obviously really great at doing that. So yeah, university is now becoming a growing piece of the demanded action for brands booking space with us. So looking at sector deep dives, we've covered off food and drink, obviously forming the largest share of this year's activity, sampling led, but also experiential, very much present over the spring and summer months and definitely linked to major events, sporting events, etc. We've talked a lot about beauty and personal care and the huge growth in those bookings. The growth here is definitely in H2. It's definitely indoor activations, and it's definitely towards gifting. And it's this mix of sort of classic counter style beauty counter experiences and more immersive installations. We've also talked about tech being really important, and it is growing. Entertainment alone at 12% of all of our bookings in 2025, and obviously highly experiential, as I said before, making the intangible tangible. And finally, we talked a bit about nicotine and vaping, currently representing about 10% of 2025 bookings. I say currently because we've still got a week of 2025. This activity is really tightly managed and well managed, and tends to centre on only appropriate audiences and venues. And finally, seasonal patterns, and this has changed. I've been running Space and People for 25 years. There was a huge seasonality spike in Q4 in the past. Now we've seen more brands going outside, and summer is a really big time of year for experiential events. Obviously, Q4 still remains strong, and obviously you can't see December on there, but it is a spike. Q4 is more about gifting, beauty, indoor presence. Summer, obviously, sampling, FMCG, outdoor friendly activity. And then new product launches, a bit of a spike in March when all the new products come out and the early brand advertising campaigns start. That all happens in spring. So this is showing a new seasonal pattern for us. It used to be a huge December spike. Now we're seeing this sort of bubble between about June and August. And what does this mean for next year? What do we think is going to happen next year? We think that sampling will stay strong. Again, I'm going back to Danny's presentation. This whole idea of new brands entering the market means that sampling will remain very strong in 2026 because it's a scalable way for brands to create impact. It encourages trial. And if you're one of these new brands popping up, it's a cost-effective way of getting people to try your product. We're already seeing, and this is very early in the year for us, we're already seeing increased interest from brands, particularly linked to major sporting events next year. Obviously, we've got the World Cup over the summer. We usually see booking interest for mid-2026 in probably February, March of that year. We're seeing it already. So I do think the sampling activity will be very strong. I've gone on and on about beauty and wellness. That will continue to grow. It doesn't look like it's unlikely to wane. It's a huge trend amongst the younger generation, and getting share of voice in this very competitive market means that we think this sector will continue to spend on experience, and will use all of the high-tech products that they're increasingly using to show and tell. And on the matter of show and tell, we think we'll see more tech and streaming. Touch it, try it, play it is the mantra for tech brands. And the ability for experiential to deliver that means that this trend for streaming and tech giants to go live will continue strongly in 2026. So that kind of sums up my run through of activity. Thank you very much for listening. We are Space and People. Like I say, we are the #1 place in the UK for booking brand space. And we have a multitude of insights on what happens when you go into any of our locations. Again, freely available on the IPM website, or do ring us if you want to talk about the best place for your brand. But Harry, Emma, thank you very much for inviting me to speak today.
Nancy, that was brilliant. Thank you so much for your time today. Great to see tech brands venturing into experiential. I know OpenAI launched their first brand campaign this year to attempt to humanize the brand, but I look forward to seeing their brand experience in 2026. I love that regional breakdown of experiential bookings across the UK, so useful. I can see Sam's slides are now ready, so I'll pass over to you, Sam.
Perfect. Thank you very much, Harry, for having me on this webinar as a panelist to talk through sort of 2025 from a compliance perspective. Thank you also to Danny and Nancy for being such hard acts to follow. We've seen some interesting, informative food and drinks trends, some wildly fascinating experiential campaigns, and I am aware legal and compliance by comparison, can sometimes feel like the doom and gloom portion of what we do as marketers. But I am happy to say that from a compliance outlook, this year has been a good one. If I had to summarize 2025 in one line, it would be this: same rules, very different mood. This wasn't the year of shiny new legislation landing at our feet. Instead, it was the year regulators collectively decided they were done explaining themselves. Across CAP, the ASA, the CMA, the ICO, and a few other acronyms we all know and love, the emphasis shifted from do marketers understand the rules to prove to us you are following them. And promotional marketing has been right at the center of that shift because it's where pricing, data, digital mechanics, and consumer behavior all collide. And in a cost of living context, regulators have been very comfortable framing poor promotional practice as consumer harm. So 2025 wasn't about reinventing compliance. It was about old rules growing new teeth. So AI, artificial intelligence, this really stopped being a novelty in 2025 and started to be seen as a genuine compliance risk, or to some, even a disruptor, particularly for anyone who followed the recent House of Commons debate hosted by the Institute of Promotional Marketing. The discussion around AI has made one thing very clear. Regulators are no longer asking whether AI will be used in marketing, they're asking how it will be used and will it be used responsibly. From an advertising perspective, the Committee of Advertising Practice were very clear throughout 2025. Using AI does not outsource responsibility. If an AI-generated claim is misleading, exaggerated, unverifiable, or simply wrong, liability still sits squarely with the brand and the promoter. The AI wrote it is not and never will be a defense. We've also seen growing scrutiny around automated promotional mechanics. Things like instant wins, algorithmic selection of winners, and probabilistic triggers. These systems are increasingly attractive because they're efficient and scalable, but regulators are now expecting them to be auditable. That means you must be able to explain in plain English how winners are selected, what randomness looks like in practice, and why the process is fair. If your explanation relies on phrases like, the system just does it, that's a red flag. This links neatly with the Information Commissioner's Office and their growing interest in automated decision making. Where AI systems are determining outcomes without meaningful human insight, promoters may be drifting into Article 22 of the UK GDPR territory, the provision that gives individuals the right not to be subject to decisions based solely on automated processing. That's particularly relevant where promotions have legal or material effects, such as high-value prizes or exclusions from winning. And there's an interesting twist here. The ASA themselves are now using artificial intelligence to monitor compliance, especially around influencer ad disclosure. Their active ad monitoring system has analyzed over 50,000 pieces of content across Instagram, TikTok. This includes things like stories, reels, and just general posts. The results show improvement, but around 57% of influencer ads are properly disclosed, which is not high enough. The bigger message is this: AI is now being used by regulators to spot non-compliance at scale. So what's the takeaway? Well, it's simple but important. AI can absolutely be used in promotions, but only where you understand it, you control it, and you can explain it. If you can't clearly describe how your system works, how your decisions are made, or where human oversight sits, you probably shouldn't be using artificial intelligence to run your promotion at all. Alcohol promotions in Scotland. So the rules here haven't changed. It's what people will be used to. Anyone that has sent in some terms and conditions to the IPM for us to review for alcohol promotion in Scotland will be fully aware of what the regulations are, but they came under much tighter scrutiny in 2025. And what's important to stress here is that this hasn't happened because of brand new legislation being introduced overnight. Instead, what we've seen is much stricter interpretation and enforcement of the existing rules, particularly around how alcohol promotions might interact with consumers, and even where that interaction isn't necessarily intentional. Historically, brands and agencies have taken comfort in the idea that trade-only promotions sit in a relatively safe space. If something was aimed at retailers, at staff, or the supply chain, it was often assumed to be low risk from a regulatory perspective. That assumption no longer holds in Scotland. Regulators are now looking beyond the label of trade and asking whether the mechanics, the visibility, or downstream effects of a promotion could influence consumer behavior in any way. And that influence doesn't have to be direct. We're not just talking about consumers entering a competition themselves. If a promotion could shape how alcohol is displayed, promoted, recommended, or talked about at any point of sale, that's enough to raise concern. In other words, if a trade mechanic has the potential to affect the consumer experience, it's firmly on the regulator's radar. We need to be careful. We've seen particular sensitivity around QR codes, on-pack incentives, and digital pathways. These are often designed with good intentions, for example, to provide product information, reward retailers, or track engagement. But from a regulatory perspective, these tools can blur the line very quickly. A QR code on pack that leads to content beyond basic product information, or an incentive that encourages increased visibility or recommendation, can start to look less like a trade activity and more like an indirect consumer marketing campaign. Another major theme here is context. Regulators are paying more closer attention to where promotions appear, not just what they say. Placement in environments such as gyms, cinemas, leisure centres, or other mixed venues which might have been classed as trade will significantly increase risk, particularly where children or young people may be present. Even if the promotion itself is technically compliant, the surrounding environment can materially change how it's assessed. And that leads us on to the most important takeaway from this side. The core question regulators are now asking has changed. It's no longer simply, is this a consumer promotion? But the question has become, could this reach, affect, or influence a consumer at any point in its life cycle? That leads us on to data minimization. Data minimization itself wasn't a new concept in 2025. It hasn't been a new concept for many years now. It's been a core principle of data protection for a long amount of time. What we did feel this year was the tone and confidence of enforcement change. This message from regulators, particularly from the ICO, has become much clearer. Understanding the principle is no longer enough. Promoters are expected to actively apply it in practice. We've seen growing discomfort from the ICO around promoters collecting personal data they simply don't need to run a promotion. This has been one of the most consistent pressure points all year. Classic examples of this, at least what I see from a terms and conditions perspective, will be asking for a full postcode on entry when a prize is digital. We don't need it for an e-voucher, for example, or collecting a phone number where there's no genuine need for urgent fulfillment or winner contact. If an email would suffice, we should be sticking with that where possible. These aren't edge cases anymore. They're exactly the types of practices that are being questioned. And what's changed is the regulator's willingness to challenge the default approach. For a long time, data fields have been carried over from one campaign to the next without much thought. We've always collected this, is no longer an acceptable justification. Promoters are now expected to ask for every data point, why do we need this? And what breaks if we don't collect it? And another area that's come under sharper focus is the relationship between brands, agencies, and suppliers. Data minimization doesn't just apply at the point of entry, it applies across the entire data chain. We've seen increased scrutiny of data processing agreements, particularly where they're vague, missing altogether, or clearly out of date. Agreements don't clearly define roles, responsibilities, and limits on data use are now a genuine risk, and rather than a theoretical one. Retention has been another major pressure point. Holding on to competition or promotion data just in case, that won't cut it anymore and is no longer a justifiable defense. And we've seen that message land much more forcefully this year. Regulators expect retention periods to be specific, proportionate, and justified, not open-ended. If there's a single theme running through all of this, it's discipline. Discipline is what you collect. Discipline is how long you keep it. And discipline is being able to explain every decision you've made around personal data, not in an abstract legal language, but in clear, practical terms. And the takeaway here is simple. Collect less, keep it for less, and make sure every data decision can be justified if someone asks. Because in 2025, that question is no longer hypothetical, it's increasingly likely. HFSS. This will be the one that everyone has been thinking about all year. This is the regulatory elephant in the room. Throughout 2025, it's existed in this awkward space between what is technically live and what feels like practically enforceable. And for anyone that's been lucky enough to avoid HFSS all year, what this of course stands for is any product that is high in fat, salt, or sugar. From a legal standpoint, the position has felt uncertain. The full set of advertising and promotional restrictions haven't yet landed on the statute books in the way that many of us would have expected. But at the same time, location-based restrictions are already live, and that partial implementation has created a little bit of confusion. Brands and agencies have been left navigating a landscape where some rules apply, some are coming, and enforcement timelines haven't always felt clear. Some of you would have seen that this did recently change, and we do have some further clarity. The Advertising Standards Authority published updated less healthy food and drink advertising guidance on the 4th of December, and with that came a very clear signal to the market. The preparation phase is over. Regulators are no longer interested in hearing that brands are getting ready for HFSS regulation. The expectation now is that meaningful changes should already be underway. And that means brands should be actively re-engineering creative assets to strip out HFSS cues. And this goes well beyond just removing explicit product shots. Visual recognizability checks are now essential. If something looks like a HFSS product, sounds like one, or even feels like one to the average consumer, then the rules are likely to apply. Branding, colorways, mascots, taglines, all of these elements can pull an asset into scope, even where the product itself isn't front and center. October also marked an interesting moment with the introduction of voluntary HFSS regulation. Some retailers, manufacturers, brands moved very quickly to align with the voluntary code, adjusting promotions and marketing strategies early to reduce future risk. What we saw from the IPM was several major food brands, predominantly with HFSS portfolios, running campaigns that were brand only, not product led, focusing on heritage, values, or even humor in some cases, free from pack shots, product imagery, or consumption cues. Others did take a different view, interpreting the voluntary guidance as a signal that stricter rules were coming, but not yet enforceable. So that has led to a push of HFSS related activity before the guidance fully reshaped marketing strategies. One last HFSS hurrah, so to speak. And that divergence is important because it shows how regulators are likely to view behavior retrospectively. Early alignment suggests good faith. Pushing activity through at last minute technically complies today, but it doesn't always age well under scrutiny. We will be running some dedicated HFSS sessions with the IPM next year. The full regulations are coming into play on the 5th of January. So we will be looking to give our members more guidance on that. The message for 2025 from a HFSS perspective is quite simple, really. The takeaway is assume scrutiny, not flexibility. If you're waiting for perfect certainty before acting, you're already behind where the regulators are expecting you to be. So some other things that happened in 2025, more of a quick fire round, I suppose. Things that do shape what we do as marketers and how we're being regulated, but maybe didn't grab the headlines that HFSS and sort of artificial intelligence did this year. The first one, the soft drinks industry levy. So sugar tax, as a lot of us will call it, introduced higher levies on sugary drinks and certain high sugar products to curb consumption and drive formulation. Brands increased prices on sugary products, often reducing discounting or volume-based promotions to offset the tax. And some companies reduced sugar content to fall behind thresholds. And the CMA price transparency guidance. The CMA published its final transparency guidance under the Digital Markets Competition and Consumers Act. This guidance is not about discounts or sales mechanics. It's about how prices are presented to consumers. The CMA has opened investigations and issued advisory letters across multiple sectors, making it clear that this is not theoretical guidance. And lastly, we are then just onto our sort of greatest hits of 2025. William Hill were caught out by a headline in-app offer that promised more than the qualifying spend actually delivered. Small print could not rescue a misleading headline. It's really important to be making sure that we are double, triple, quadruple checking our significant conditions. They may not save us, but they might stop us from being as misleading to consumers as we intend to be. And of course, that's always the goal. The ASA also coordinated action against cosmetic procedures, advertising, showing how seriously social responsibility is being taken, particularly where body image and medical risk is involved. I'm sure we all heard the term BBL this year. It was a big thing across social media platforms, and the ASA caught wind of it as well. So that is on the lookout for further regulation. Gambling advertising once again reminded us that appealing to under 18s, whether through imagery, celebrities, or AI generated characters, remain a hard red line. And one interesting sort of win where a complaint was made, but the ASA has sided with the marketer, was the ruling about Absolute Vodka's Keith Haring campaign, which did not breach the alcohol advertising rules because the ads were not likely to appeal particularly to under 18s, despite using bold, colourful art motifs. The ASA applied the CapCode's youth appeal test, finding the imagery and art collaboration skewed toward adult cultural recognition rather than youth cultural or childlike design cues. And for marketers, this underscores that creative, adult orientated cultural references can be used in alcohol campaigns so long as they don't have content that disproportionately appeals to minors, reinforcing the need to assess likely audience appeal in promotional marketing. Across all of these, the pattern is the same. Clarity beats creativity when consumers are vulnerable. And that sort of concludes my legal compliance and regulatory affairs roundup of 2025. As I say, no new legislation hitting us, just sort of stricter enforcement on what we already know.
Thank you, Sam. Beavertown is another one walking that tightrope between child appeal and adult content using that kind of cartoon graphics. I noticed the ASA saying that over 90% of rulings this year were caught via AI. For those who attended our debate at the House of Commons, you'll know this narrative very well. It's time now for the Q&A. So over to you, the audience. You've got a legal expert, you've got all the experiential data you could wish for, and a food and drink specialist. So do pop your questions in the chat, starting with the question on everyone's lips. Sam, HFSS is the hot topic. With the industry asked to comply voluntarily from the 1st of October this year, ahead of legal enforcement in January the 5th, what response have you seen from the industry so far?
Yeah, so the introduction of voluntary regulation, it was an interesting one. I think it was probably a stretch from regulators to hope that the response from marketers and advertisers would maybe shape the landscape come January. People would start to see trends and how the behavior was going to go forwards. It was quite polarizing, really. I touched on it a little bit before, but we saw many different examples of two different responses. A lot of the brands that have maybe deeper pockets, bigger legal teams, and can sort of afford to put a lot of resources into researching the legal side of their promotions, were able to voluntarily regulate. We saw shifts towards some of the exclusions that have been spoken about within the regulations, such as brand advertisements, legacy brands, people such as Cadbury's, really leaning into the milk bottle and the color purple rather than the chocolate bar itself. Of course, not all brands and all marketers have those resources available to them. We don't all have a color of the rainbow that we can go to that represents our brand perfectly, like the color purple. So some brands did see it as a last hurrah. You know, we've got a few months until January to splurge on HFSS budgets. Let's get all of our campaigns out there. Let's really push it in an attempt to maybe build that customer base, increase their sort of share of the market while they can, and hope that that carries them into 2026. Which sort of response was the correct one from a a compliance guy? I'm going to say that we should be voluntarily regulating, but we'll know come January which was the right way to go.
Thank you, Sam. Just coming back to Danny, if you're still with us, Danny, are you there? Becoming full circle.
Yeah, still here.
Cool.
Hiya.
Still with us, good stuff. Building on Sam's kind of points there, but less from a legal perspective and more from your kind of brand perspective and shopper perspective. There's been a lot of talk about a creative renaissance in this HFSS debate, brands shifting from product pushing to brand building. In this year's Christmas work, are you actually seeing that shift happen?
I'm loving all the Christmas sort of TV adverts that we've had this year. I mean, it's interesting because whenever we speak to consumers about how they would rank supermarkets, we always have M&S and Waitrose that are at the top and kind of go around in a little bucket, but as the two of them, which Waitrose do very much lean or sort of nudge to in their Christmas ad this year with Keira Knightley's brother called Mark, which is very much a nod to Marks and Spencer's. But we also find that Morrison's and Asda kind of go around together in terms of the way that consumers rank. And it's really interesting because I think both Christmas adverts for Morrison's and Asda are absolutely brilliant. Asda focuses much more on price. They do the Asda prices tap still, and it's all around, don't be a Grinch about Christmas because our prices are still very low and good value. Whereas Morrison's are much more around, they actually don't show much food or too many products in their Christmas ad. It's more about sort of the preparation, the farmers, the agriculture, and all of that sort of process behind making sure that you have your Christmas dinner on the table months before, in terms of what they're doing to prepare. So yeah, we're kind of seeing a mix of brands, supermarket brands, I suppose, kind of trying to lean on more brand rather than product in some cases. And it's interesting. I think they're finding that because of this legislation, they're having to focus much more on brand, what their brand's on a mission for, rather than specific product.
Thank you, Danny. We've had another question come through for you. TikTok Shop grew up quickly in 2025 and bigger retailers started taking it seriously. Is it now a serious platform for sparking trial in food and drink? What do you think?
Yeah, I think it is. I think you can still sort of dial up language that makes you, think of taste or think of texture. And I think because of the fact that you can very, very quickly tap and shop and you get it in next door delivery very quickly. So yeah, I think that TikTok Shop, I don't work so much in terms of social media, but I do think that TikTok Shop can, because of that easy accessibility, can dial that up. Yeah.
Thank you very much. I think that concludes the session. We're running slightly over. A huge thank you to Danny, Nancy, and Sam for breaking down the real ebbs and flows of promotional marketing in 2025, from how shoppers behaved to where live activity grew to the compliance shifts that are already shaping 2026 planning. Over to you. What's your biggest trend for 2025? And if we missed one, tell us on LinkedIn, tagging the Institute of Promotional Marketing and any of our panelists so we can keep the conversation going. The full webinar will be available to IPM members on the members dashboard. Thank you very much for joining us today. And on behalf of the IPM, we wish you a Merry Christmas and look forward to seeing you at the next IPM webinar in 2026. Thank you.